The Inner Sanctum presents the Wednesday Whip Around.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Wednesday Whip Around. A few new faces this week, as our usual host, Anthony, has had to step aside. But don't worry, I'm here to take his place, and I promise you we have a bumper edition of the show coming up this week for you. Joining me, Stephen Paletti, is Lachlan Onions and Kristen Sims. Lachlan, how are you tonight?
Good, thanks, Stephen. Good, thanks. It's the first time on the Wednesday Rip Round, so it should be a lot of fun.
It's definitely a pleasure to have you here, and as we welcome in Kristen as well. Kristen, how are you going?
I am very well, thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
And I'm glad, and we are all glad to have you here. So a couple of big stories floating around the newswire this week, perhaps none bigger than the AFL putting a target on dissent with an automatic 50-metre penalty for any player that questions the referees. Oh, sorry, the umpires. I've got to use the correct terminology, Guernseys and umpires. It's been picked out because it has been having impact in games. Fans are starting to get pretty fed up with it. Now, my understanding is that this whole thing was brought in because there's been a lot of issues at the lower levels of Australian rules, community sport-wise and whatnot, with players showing dissent towards the umpires. And so trying to set the example at the top and hoping it filters down, as well as just crack down on general dissent from players. Kristen, we'll start with you. Do you think that the right approach has been taken here by the AFL?
I feel like the approach has actually changed. So when it first came out in the preseason, it was, we're going to, work on stopping abuse. And that's fine. 100% agree with that. I don't think if you're a 14 or 15-year-old kid who's umpiring footy in a local league on the weekend for $50, you don't deserve to get called every name under the sun because of a decision that you've made. So I agree that from that standpoint, yes, you need to stamp out abuse. But now we've gone from we're going to stamp out abuse to we're going to stamp out dissent, and we've created a whole new thing. And that's where I think it's going to lose people, and it's probably actually going to have a bigger impact, because that's the thing. If we're talking about saving the little 15-year-old that's out there on the weekend, or the old man that's volunteering who's done it for 40 years, that I just don't think that's going to do it. Because if you've ever been to a local footy match, if you start penalising people because they put their arms out to their side or they look at their mate and roll their eyes, well, that's not going to make people any happier, and it's certainly not going to get respect at all.
Yeah, it seems like they've gone too far in the opposite direction from what they want to achieve. Because the reality is, and we see this, is that the players at the younger level always emulate what the stars in the game are doing, week in, week out. And so if the stars are going back at the umpires, I can definitely see why the kids would be going back, because, Dusty gets to do this, Buddy gets to do this, Cameron gets to do this, whichever player it is. So why should it not be okay for me to do it? But it, as I said, it almost seems like it's gone too far in the wrong direction. Lachlan, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I have to definitely agree, because I've played sports since I was 5, 6 years old. So obviously I understand why they do want to protect referees and umpires in AFL. And I think this also applies to pretty much any sport, really, that they do need to be stamping it out at a higher level. But I think what it is causing is, as Kristen said, if you're going to have local level umpires calling out a player for putting their arms out, they're only going to cop more abuse rather than stamping it out. And I think from what I've found, I've respected umpires and referees that I've played alongside, where they allow you to question the decision, simply ask, why was this given? And they'll give you a fair response. They'll say, this is why it is. From what I saw, it looked like you did this. You play on, and there's a mutual respect between the player and umpire when you are allowed to question why, and they give you a reasonable response. But yeah, I can see why they wanted to do it, but they've definitely gone way too far. It's only going to create more problems going forward if they stick to this.
Yeah, because we've seen that there's a shortage of match officials, umpires, referees, at all levels across all sports. They're exiting the games in droves. So I can definitely see why the AFL's chosen to do it. What solution do the two of you think there is? And Chris, I'll start with you again. Like, what solution do you think there is to stop this from happening, to stop the abuse so that there's not this mass exodus of officials?
I think two things that I've sort of thought about ever since it came in is we're treating the problem and we're not trying to come up with a solution. So, again, we try and tout the AFL as like the most professional sports league there is, but we still don't have full-time umpires. So while you've got guys that are not doing it full-time, you're leaving an even bigger margin for error. And I feel like it leaves almost a scapegoat for the AFL to be able to go, oh, well, these guys, it's not their full-time job, so you can't put too much pressure on them and things like that. So I think you can't just go, it's all the players, and try and stamp it out that way. But also I would like to see, and I haven't heard a single person bring it up, is pretty much every other sport now has a challenge. So if the umpire makes a call, you can challenge that decision. And I think if you're going to stop people from being able to show any frustration or any kind of emotion, you need to come up with another offer and go, right, okay, we're going to give each team 3 challenges a game, and it lifts, because that will lift the standard of the umpiring for a starter, and it will also take some frustration away from the players. And I think that's one of the only ways where it's going to be fair, because I think we're starting to forget that the players are the game. The umpires are not the game. I know we need the umpires, but I don't pay to go to watch Ray Chamberlain pay 50 meters against my team 10 times. I go to watch my team play football. And as a sport, we love the guys who have some personality and things like that. And we're just trying to take that away. And on the weekend, we saw what happened with Harris Andrews. And then I saw one just before where Christian Petrarca put his head down and shook his head, and they decided that that's a 50-meter penalty. Like, that's not dissent, that's frustration. And now we're going to lead into as well, what happens if you've just chased someone and you put your arms up on your head? Are you going to get called a 50-meter while you're halfway in between that? Like, there's going to have to be some take on the other side as well to give the players back something if they're not going to be able to vent their frustrations.
Lachlan, I'll come to you in a second. I just want to touch back quickly on something Kristen said. You mentioned the idea of the challenge system. Now, to use the NRL as an example, the challenge system has been relatively effective, but there's still some things you can't challenge on. You can't challenge on forward passes. I know there's a couple of other things you can't challenge on. But the point is, like, you'd have to have a very clear criteria of what can and can't be challenged in the AFL. And for such a fast-moving game, I don't quite know how you'd implement it. And would we trust the AFL to implement it, given that their goal review challenge, they still can't put HD cameras in the goalposts? We're in 2022. Are you telling me it is that hard to go and get a HD camera, stick it in a goalpost, and record it? I could stick my mobile phone on the side of the Gold Coast right now. I was at Gold Coast. On the side of the goalpost right now, and I could get a better quality video than what the AFL can get. Like, are you telling me it is that? Like, how would we trust them to run a challenge system when they can't even put HD video in 2022?
Oh, I agree, 100%. That I think that the goal review system is another thing that we let the umpires challenge a goal, but the players don't get to go, hey, I think I touched that or I did that. So yeah, I agree that there's a lot of things that would need to happen, and I'm not sure how it would be done, but I just think that we're putting too much focus on the aspect of the game that's not really the players. And, if you jump on any social media at the moment, I don't see too many people that are happy with it. And, there's a lot of people saying that they're going to just go back to watching local footy. So something needs to be done, and sort of standing there today and going, well, no, you're not going to be able to shake your head or do this or do that, is not the answer, and it's not the best thing for the game.
Lachlan, I'll pose the same question to you. What do you think the solutions are?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one. Like, obviously with that, I was just talking about the challenge system with the AFL, it is, as you mentioned, extremely fast paced. So it'd be really difficult to try and figure out a way to work it in. I do like the idea though. I guess the thing that's worked at local levels, like recently with soccer, they've introduced 10-minute sin bins. And one thing I've noticed a lot is it has reduced the amount of abuse that referees cop at local level than what they used to. Because, I mean, Stephen, you would know this because I know you're an avid follower of the sport as well. You'll see, particularly over in like Europe and that, there'll be a decision made and you'll see pretty much half the team rushing at the referee, crowding around them as such, just going off at them.
Just get the yellow card out. Like, get them all for dissent. Like that's how you stop that. Like, and I understand that refereeing is incredibly hard and you have to manage the game, but the rule of dissent is there. Get a yellow card out and you stop it immediately. Players will stop doing it. But anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah, so I think AFL, they should almost look to do something like if it's a clear and obvious sort of dissent, like going back to what used to be swearing or like doing general abuse, maybe 50-meter penalty or something along those lines, but go back to, I guess, almost what it used to be rather than now where it's like any sort of sign language or anything like that. It's because it's taking the emotion out of the game. And you've got to remember that these are 36 players on the field who are putting their heart and soul into a game that means a lot to not just them, but 100,000 people watching in the grandstands. And they're going to be emotional. They're going to get frustrated when mistakes are made, and you've got to have that allowance for them. So whether just maybe make it more clear cut and obvious where it's genuine abuse, go like give the 50-meter penalty, that's fair enough. But if it's just the sign language or just putting your arms out, they need to take a bit of a step back, I think.
Yeah, I think the problem is as well, like you highlighted there, Lockie, is it's okay for the umpires to make a mistake, but it's never okay for the players to make a mistake. And that's where you're going to get a disconnect and it's going to cause more trouble. But also as well, if you go back to the showdown a couple of weeks ago, like Port Adelaide had figured out that they could get their player to run close to the player that was kicking the ball, which is a 50-meter penalty. So what you're going to start seeing happen is people do things to force people to be frustrated and say things. So players are going to start to figure out how they can work that rule and take advantage of it. And then that's going to cause even more problems as well. And it's just, I don't think it's been implemented in a way that's really going to be effective to what they're looking for.
So just quickly before we move on to our next topic, and I'll put this to both of you. Instead of, like, if the AFL is going to continue with this 50-meter for dissent, would a temporary solution be 25 meters for dissent, 50 for everything else? That way it doesn't have as much of an impact, because we know how important 50 meters is on an AFL field. Like, would halving that distance be a, okay, we'll meet you in the middle solution. We're not ready to let this battle go yet, but we don't want to punish teams as much?
It's like 25 meters is still a long way, but obviously it would be a start at least. You are trying to, I guess, set an example that you don't want dissent given to umpires at junior level. So shortening the distance could work, although it would then, I'm still not sure about this, to be honest. It seems a bit, especially after this weekend, it's put a bit of sour taste in my mouth. All this, the sheer amount that I've been given, it's not good.
I think, again, it's difficult because the 25, yes, would be better because it doesn't hurt the team as much, but I'm a bit sort of in Lockie's field. There was too much this weekend that was left alone, and to me, that's where we're going to have more issues as well. Is that it's every different person's interpretation of what they think dissent is, and the comments that came out today didn't actually make it any clearer. They just said, well, there'll be no dissent, but the umpires, it's up to them to choose the dissent, but then they all know what is and isn't dissent. So it's about as clear as mud, and I'm not sure anybody's really got an answer or a solution to it to make it better for the short term.
That's completely fair enough, and I guess we'll just have to see what happens, as frustrating as that may be. Moving on to our second topic here tonight, we shift our focus to the AFC Champions League and Melbourne City, their first time competing in the competition, and they picked up their first win on Monday night, 3-0 over United City's. Stefan Kolakowski opened the scoring in the 34th minute. Marco Tilio got himself a brace in the 59th and the 75th minutes. This was after they had their opening game as a 1-1 draw. And I'll come to you first, Kristen, how far do you think Melbourne City can actually go in this competition?
Well, I think it depends on how flexible they're sort of willing to be. I think we've seen in the A-Leagues that their downside was certainly sort of holding back a little bit, and they were able to sort of overcome a lot of teams sort of in the second half. So they might need to sort of switch up a little bit and try and be a bit more aggressive sort of on the start and not fall behind, because that's the thing we see these other teams from the Asian sort of continent area play a different sort of style of soccer to what they're sort of used to here. So they're going to have to be flexible and adaptive to try and sort of get across some of these bigger names that they're going to be playing over the next few weeks.
And Lachlan, they certainly have the easier group when compared to Sydney FC, and they really should be topping the group. How far do you think they can go if they manage to actually top the group?
I don't think they can go too far yet, and I think it's just down to the fact. I mean, they might have one of those Western Sydney Wanderers, miracle first time cup runs where they get all the way through to the final, but I think probably first knockout stage, I think, just because A-League clubs in general have really struggled in this competition. I remember being a Brisbane Roar supporter, even in our glory days when under Ange Postecoglou, when we were absolutely tearing up the A-League, we'd still struggle in Asia. And it has been a continuous problem for Australian sides in this competition, is that you generally don't expect to see us out of the group stage. So the fact that Melbourne City have put themselves in this position is a great chance to, in this situation that we're in, where there's so much bad stuff happening, being spoken about the A-League week in, week out. This is a good chance for an A-League side to be able to put themselves on the world stage, or at least the continental stage. But it will be tough, although they do have a decent side like Tilio. He looks amazing when he looks like he's going to be a good player for the future for Australia, that's for sure.
And Christian, I guess one of the criticisms that has been levied at Melbourne City and indeed their coaching staff is the fact that Patrick Casnorbo doesn't like to use the bench.
Yes, I've seen and heard a lot of that, and I think that's probably going to be one thing where he's just going to have to change his mind. We're going to see more fast pace, more running, and they're going to get tired, and they're not going to have a choice. You're going to have to rotate and use the bench, because you're going to have to be competitive for that full game. Otherwise, you're just not going to get to where you want to be.
Given the fact that it is Melbourne City, one only needs to look to their crosstown rivals, Melbourne Victory, and the person who's currently behind that helm is Tony Popovic, who's done all this before with the Wanderers. Does Casnorbo maybe need to look at shaking things up a little bit and take a page out of the Tony Popovic playbook?
Oh, absolutely. He's won it. He knows what needs to be done, and why not? Like recently, they did lose 3-0 to Melbourne Victory. So why wouldn't you try and shake up the pieces? Because you've got your one chance. So this is the time to do something different, especially if what you generally follow isn't working.
Yep, no, that's definitely the fair approach to look at it. We'll move on to our final topic for this week's edition of the Whip Around, and that is that the Australian women's national ice hockey team is going to the IIHF championships in May in Croatia. Australia weren't expected to send a side because of COVID and originally pulled out of the scheduled dates. But with the change in dates, because New Zealand also pulled out, and I believe one other team in the group also pulled out, they did reschedule it to give everyone a chance to attend, and New Zealand still chose not to attend. They won it in 2020, and they have a chance to do it again, which this time should ensure them promotion up the ladder, which they didn't get to do in 2020 because of COVID. Kristen, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? There's been a massive shake-up with a lot of things when it comes to COVID, but this is probably a positive that we've got now. And why wouldn't you want to go over and defend your title? It's exciting, and it's just little old Australia in the ice hockey. So let's get it going. Let's get the girls over there and let's promote it. I think it's great. It's great for the sport, and it's great for all the athletes. So yeah, I'm excited, and I hope we can follow the girls closely.
And Lachlan, obviously, there's a bunch of returning faces, also a bunch of new faces who haven't had a chance to represent Australia at this level yet. And indeed, they haven't had a chance to play too much as well because of COVID. Like, how much of an impact do you think that's going to have, knowing that they should be going into this tournament as favourites?
It'll definitely make things a bit more difficult because obviously, as you mentioned, there's a whole heap of new faces, so they've got to be able to gel together as such. And with that additional pressure of going in as favourites, it's definitely not easy if you're making your debut, knowing that you've got to be winning these sort of games. Whereas if you're going in making a debut for a side that's more of a minnow, you'd be able to go in as without the pressure as such and be able to enjoy the game and get yourself into the international stage and understand how to play and all that stuff. But yeah, so there will be definitely that additional pressure on all the younger players coming up, that's for sure.
Regardless, this should still prove to be a very fascinating tournament to watch. I know I will be watching with keen interest as one of the Sanctum resident ice hockey fans. It's going to be a lot of early mornings and a lot of late nights, depending on which way you want to dice it and what time you want to take a nap. You can head over to theinnersanctum.com.au to read Gordon Goodenough's article on that, which includes the entire squad, times, as well as some predictions for the tournament. So be sure to go out and check that piece out. And unfortunately, the clock has beaten us this week here. Still plenty of things we could have talked about, but we have run out of time. Lachlan, Kristen, thank you very much for joining us here on the Wednesday Whip Around. Have you guys got any articles out at the moment that you want to plug, which you can check over at theinnersanctum.com.au?
Not at the moment. I've got a couple that will be coming out on the NBL One North in the next couple of weeks, but none at the moment for Inner Sanctum. But keep your eyes peeled for the basketball ones coming soon.
Fair enough. Kristen, what about you?
Yeah, I've got two that'll hopefully be out this week on WNBA draft prospects, draftees, Amy Atwell and Jade Melbourne, who are two Australian girls who are heading over for training camps.
Memory serves me correctly, one of them was drafted by the Los Angeles Sparks, where they will potentially join up with Liz Cambage.
Yeah, Amy Atwell. Yep.
Well, definitely can't wait to read that. As always, thank you very much for tuning in this week. Be sure to subscribe to the Inner Sanctum's channel where you're watching this to stay up to date with all the range of interviews, as well as our weekly Wednesday Whip Around. Lachlan, Kristen, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.